Picture this for a second. Steam just dumped 14,000 new games onto its storefront last year. 14,000. Think about that. It's roughly 1.5 every single hour, 24/7, 365 days a year. Meanwhile, the average indie developer, they're taking home less than the price of a used hatchback after a decade of back-breaking crunch. So, when the cheerleaders on Twitter scream, "Indie games will save us all," I have to ask, save us from what, exactly? And who, pray tell, is left standing after the fireworks burn out and the confetti settles? Remember that bedtime story we all told ourselves? The one where the big studios got impossibly bloated, stuffing their games with loot boxes, day one patches, and enough microtransactions to fund a small nation, and then, along came a plucky underdog, a genuine hero, with nothing but a dream, a laptop and a Unity license. Overnight we were promised a gaming renaissance. Hollow Knight, Celeste, Stardew Valley, these were proof that small teams fueled by passion and ingenuity could still punch holes in the sky. The moral of that story was simple, almost poetic. Indie equals innovation, AAA equals apathy.
Apathy is death.
That fairy tale looked bulletproof, didn't it? Right up until the moment every kid with a laptop, a dream, and maybe just a little too much ambition tried the exact same trick. Now the digital shelves buckle under the sheer weight of retro platformers, pixel art, roguelikes, and emotional narrative experiences that feel suspiciously similar to the last 5. We've got a name for it, the indie-pocalypse, and here's the kicker. It isn't coming. It's already here, and honestly, it smells a lot like unpaid rent and instant ramen. Let's not pretend the big boys didn't light the fuse on this whole thing. They practically poured gasoline on it. Remember Cyberpunk 2077, shipped absolutely broken on last-gen consoles, a technical mess, and still had the audacity to ask for microtransaction change post-launch. Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed titles grew so gargantuan that their maps practically needed other maps just to navigate. And who could forget Battlefront 2, which let you pay real money to unlock Darth Vader, then tried to tell us it was all for a sense of pride and accomplishment. Gamers felt nickel and dimed, creativity flatlined, and the industry's goodwill bled out faster than a red shirt in a horror movie. We were disillusioned, frustrated, and frankly, a bit fed up. Then, into this mess, walked the indies. Their games were often the same price as a couple of fancy lattes, no loot boxes in sight, no executive committee watering down mechanics to appeal to some nebulous wider demographic. They felt like punk rock in 1977, raw, cheap, and brutally honest. Players rallied around them. Money, real money, flooded in. Hope, for a brief, beautiful moment, tasted like pixelated rainbows. It was a genuine counterculture movement, a breath of fresh air in a stale corporate room. For a brief shining moment it felt like anything was possible. A solo developer really could code in a basement, launch their game on Steam, and wake up a millionaire. Toby Fox's Undertale proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that humor and heart could absolutely beat photorealistic gore any day of the week. Eric Barone, the genius behind Stardew Valley, single-handedly resuscitated an entire genre, proving that a meticulously crafted farming sim could capture millions of hearts. And then there was Mojang, the creators of Minecraft, selling to Microsoft for a cool $2.5 billion. Suddenly, every hobbyist, every aspiring coder, every dreamer believed the same lottery ticket was waiting for them, tucked away in their back pocket. The numbers certainly looked heroic. The indie revenue market is projected to hit an impressive $4.85 billion this year alone. Mobile storefronts and console partnerships like ID Day Xbox and PlayStation Indies constantly reassure us that growth is healthy. But here's the thing about averages: they lie. Slice that multi-billion-dollar pie into 14,000 tiny slices, and suddenly, most plates come up empty. The dream was real for a few, but the reality for the many was far more sobering. The perceived ease of entry and the promise of riches created a gold rush, but like most gold rushes, Only a few struck it rich, while many more dug tirelessly, finding nothing but dirt. Steam's open door policy, a double-edged sword if there ever was one, means there are no gatekeepers, which sounds great in theory, but it also means there are no lifeguards. Last year alone saw more new games released than the entire 1990s console catalog. Let that sink in. The median launch now sells under 5,000 copies lifetime. And that's before you factor in Valve's 30% cut, regional pricing adjustments, and the inevitable returns. Suddenly, your $1 million revenue headline quickly shrinks to $200,000 to split among 3 roommates who just spent 4 years eating instant noodles and dreaming of success. It's a harsh reality check. Marketing costs? They scale mercilessly. A single, well-placed TikTok campaign can easily swallow an entire art budget for a small team. Meanwhile, AAA publishers? They can buy front-page banners on every digital storefront and even run Super Bowl ads. The result is painfully clear. Visibility is effectively auctioned off to the highest bidder. Passion projects, born from years of dedication and sacrifice, often sink without a single review, lost in the algorithmic noise. Discoverability isn't just difficult, it's practically a black hole for most. Because budgets, for most indies, stay microscopic, that infamous crunch doesn't magically vanish. It just migrates. Indie crunch looks less like a high-rise studio working late and more like a single coder pulling 80-hour weeks, while also handling PR, QA, community management and their own taxes. It's a relentless, all-consuming grind. Burnout is rampant. Mental health threads on our game dev read less like forums and more like disaster diaries. Many teams manage to ship their game, patch it twice, and then quietly dissolve their dreams, extinguished. The survivors often pivot to contract work, or ironically re-enter the AAA world, where at least the health insurance is real and the paychecks are consistent. The freedom of indie development often comes at a steep, often invisible personal cost. Here's an uncomfortable truth we need to talk about. Some of the loudest, most celebrated indie darlings aren't technically indie in the way we romanticize it. Take Fall Guys for instance. Published by Devolver Digital, sure, but ultimately backed by the immense marketing muscle of Sony. Or Hades. Supergiant Games is undoubtedly independent, but their production values, their polish and their reach rival mid-tier DA projects. And that's perfectly fine, until algorithmic storefronts consistently elevate the already polished, already well-marketed titles, effectively burying the genuinely small, truly struggling teams. We celebrate the wrong games not because they're bad, far from it, but because discoverability is no longer a pure meritocracy, it's a roulette wheel, and it's increasingly rigged toward whoever can afford the premium slots, the bigger marketing pushes, and the established connections. Enter the new era, Xbox Game Pass, PlayStation Plus, the entire Netflix for games phenomena. Pundits hail it as the democratization of sampling, a fantastic way for consumers to try 100 titles for $10 a month. Developers, however, whisper a different word: devaluation. When consumers can play a massive library for a paltry monthly fee, full-price purchases for individual titles start to evaporate. Subscription deals offer lump sum advances, which are nice for short-term runway, absolutely critical for keeping the lights on, but they can be catastrophic for long-term tail revenue. Once your game is free on a service, discounting it later barely moves the needle. Studios become increasingly dependent on the next advance, the next big deal, effectively turning creative freedom into a gilded cage. It's a Faustian bargain, immediate cash for long-term uncertainty. Now let's talk about AI. These new tools promise cheaper art pipelines, auto-generated dialogue, even instant QA testing. On the surface, it sounds like a godsend for strapped indie developers. But here's the flip side. Expect the market to flood even further. When a solo creator can churn out a competent platformer in 3 months using Mid-Journey sprites and ChatGPT-generated dialogue, those 14,000 new releases could easily become 40,000. The noise rises exponentially, while human attention, our most precious commodity, remains stubbornly finite. Standing out in that tsunami of content will demand either genuine, undeniable genius or lottery-level luck. AI democratizes creation, but it also amplifies the discoverability crisis to an almost unbearable degree. Yet, for every gloomy metric, for every dire prediction, a counterexample breathes. Vampire Survivor started as a weekend jam, sold for $3, and became a genre-defining phenomenon. Its secret wasn't graphics, there were none to speak of, but a gameplay loop so hypnotic, so addictive, that players became evangelists for free. Deep Rock Galactic built an entire cult following around co-op dwarves, transparent dev streams, and a genuine connection with its player base. Among Us sat unnoticed for 2 years, until Twitch streamers discovered it during a pandemic, transforming it into a global sensation. The lesson here: community is the new marketing budget. It's not just about having players, it's about nurturing them, listening to them, and building a genuine sense of belonging. Niche early, nurture hard, and listen even harder. Games that foster deep communities are the ones that survive algorithmic tsunamis. Those that treat players merely as wallets or metrics rather than active participants are destined to drown in the sea of forgotten titles. It's about connection, not just consumption. Don't think for a second that AAA studios are sleeping on this. They're watching, they're learning, and they're cribbing. We're seeing them adopt roguelike mechanics, once an indie staple, in titles like Returnal. Deck builders, another indie favorite, are popping up in Marvel's Midnight Suns. Even town sim elements are crossing over into Assassin's Creed Valhalla DLC. The gap in terms of mechanics and ideas is narrowing, but blockbuster production costs continue to balloon, often past $200 million per title, making failure an existential threat. One catastrophic flop can shutter entire divisions, lay off hundreds. That immense pressure forces endless sequels, safe brands, and live service schemes designed to maximize retention. Indies, however, retain one priceless edge: the ability to fail cheaply. A weird experimental game can tank completely and still teach invaluable lessons. Culturally, that continuous experimentation keeps the entire medium honest, pushing boundaries and exploring new frontiers. Remove indies from the equation, and AAA would inevitably calcify into an endless parade of cinematic slot machines. We need the rebels, the risk-takers, precisely because they can afford to implode, learn, and try again, keeping the creative fires burning for everyone. Short answer: no, but the window is cracking, and it's getting harder to squeeze through. The tools are cheaper than ever, storefronts are more crowded than a rush-hour subway, and discoverability will only worsen as AI-generated content floods the market. Standing out demands not just craftsmanship but a potent combination of community engagement and ruthless marketing savvy. Expect micro studios to specialize even further. 2-person narrative teams, 3-person combat field consultancies, modular groups, assembling like Hollywood unions for specific projects. The golden lotto days of code it and they will come. Our fossil history, sustainable indie careers will increasingly look like portfolio workers, developers juggling Patreon support, contract gigs, subscription deals, merch sales, and direct community funding. Passion remains absolutely mandatory. It's the fuel, but robust business plans? They're becoming non-negotiable. It's no longer enough to just make a great game. You have to be a savvy entrepreneur, a community manager, and a marketer, all rolled into one. Indie games won't save gaming in the heroic, headline-grabbing sense that everyone craves. There's no single protagonist, no neat, tidy third-act victory, where everything is perfect. What they will do, what they already do, day in and day out, is keep the garden tilled. Every wild, experimental mechanic that blooms in a free itch.io demo today very well might become the AAA standard a decade later. Without that vibrant petri dish of risk, that constant push against the comfortable, the entire medium would ossify. It would become stagnant, predictable, and ultimately boring. So no, it's not too late. But the revolution grew up It has a mortgage now. The next wave of creators, the ones who will truly shape the future, must treat their art like a business and their business like an art. Passion alone won't pay server costs, or put food on the table, or cover the endless marketing spend. Yet profit without vision just churns out more digital wallpaper, more forgettable experiences. Find that delicate balance, that sweet spot between creative ambition and commercial reality, and maybe, just maybe, you'll ship something that truly matters before the next 14,000 games land.